Welcome to Translated's latest worldwide adventure, a race around the world in sailboats using minimal technology. Translated 9 is entered in the Ocean Globe Race, a fully crewed race in sailboats circumnavigating the planet. My name is Paul Cayard, and I'll be your host on podcasts once a week while the team sails around the world over the next 8 months. For those of you who sailed with us in San Francisco, you know the story. We've been working up to this coming Sunday for 3 years. Marco and the team are now in Southampton, England with Translated 9. The boat's fully ready to go. The crew is super excited, and we're all looking forward to wishing them well on Sunday. You may be wondering why Translated is involved in this round-the-world sailboat race. I mean, you know, Marco didn't even know anything about sailing 4 years ago. But Marco wanted to celebrate something. Two things in reality. He wanted to celebrate the fact that progress is made by people who step out of their comfort zone, people who are willing to take on challenges that maybe seem a little beyond their reach. And for Marco, obviously not being a sailor, the idea of racing around the world was well beyond his reach 4 years ago. And the second thing that Marco wants us to remember is that, yes, Translated is in the technology business, but technology is made by humans to be used by humans. And as long as we keep that in perspective, technology can be a very helpful and healthy tool for us. I want to give you an overview of the Whitbread Round the World race. The Ocean Globe Race, which Translated 9 is participating in this year, is the celebration and commemoration of the first Whitbread Round the World race, which took place 50 years ago. Whitbread is a brand of beer in England, and they were the original sponsor. And together with the Royal British Sailing Association, of course it's royal, they were the organizers of the first event. They were able to pull together 17 teams, 17 yachts to compete in that first race. And across those yachts, there were about 163 sailors on board. Only 14 boats were able to finish the race. It's obviously a very grueling race, and very unfortunately, 3 lives were lost in that very first edition in the Southern Ocean. So the race is about 27,000 miles, nautical miles around the world. And the original route started in Southampton, England, went to Cape Town, South Africa, Sydney, Australia, Rio de Janeiro, and back to Southampton. The original winner was a boat called Sayula, owned by the Carlin family, Enrique Carlin, a skipper. And that type of boat was a Swan 65. So Swan's a manufacturer. The boat was 65 feet long. The design was Sparkman and Stevens of New York. In Marco's research in preparation for the race, he thought it would be great to race this Ocean Globe race in a Swan 65. So Translated 9 is the 9th boat of a series of 41 Swan 65s, and Sayula, the original winner, was hull number 3. The boat, if you sail with us in San Francisco, that boat is hull number 23 in the series of 41. And in the 50 years, there have been 13 editions of the race. The race is held every 3 or 4 years. So also the race was bought by the Volvo company in 1998, and it changed names from the Whitbread Round the World race to the Volvo Ocean Race. Difference is that there's no GPS on board. So we're all used to knowing exactly where we are on the planet at any given time because we have our iPhones, and you know, life is easy. And the same is true on most sailboats. You have GPS. But the teams will have to figure out their location on the planet using the sextant, which is, you know, what the technology was at the time. Also, there's no autopilot. There's no powered winches, or no electrically powered winches. So the teams have to grind the winches themselves. Everything is very much a human challenge. One thing you need to know about this race is that when it gets dark at night, they don't take the sails down and put the anchor out and sit down to a nice warm dinner. Sailing takes place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the team is divided up into a watch system. On Translated 9, there are 10 sailors. 8 of them will be divided in 2 watches of 4, and every 4 hours they will rotate. That means that 4 of them will be on deck sailing the boat while 4 of them are resting. The other 2, the skipper and the navigator, manage their own watch system. Sometimes they both need to be awake, obviously at the start of the race, at the finish of the race, or anytime they're rounding a significant point of land. Also, these boats don't carry water. You might be saying, well, what are they going to do for 40 days at sea to, as far as drinking water and eating food? They have desalinators on board. So they make fresh water from the seawater. And as far as food goes, they take freeze-dried food and they hydrate that food for all their meals. So the reason for all that is to keep the weight down, obviously, significantly on the boat. I want to give you an overview of leg 1 of the Ocean Globe race. So the start is on September 8th in Southampton, England. And the first part of the race is dealing with the English Channel. The English Channel has a lot of currents. The weather systems in the North Atlantic are still permeating the English Channel and really even the Bay of Biscay, which is the area on the north side of Spain and the west side of France. And that whole area, let's say the first 3 days, 4 days of the race can be quite tricky, and dealing with can be big winds and big waves and big currents. Once the fleet gets past Cap Finisterre, which is on the west coast of Portugal, they start to enter the Azores, the trade winds of the Azores high. And there life gets a little more simple. Basically, the winds clock around through the north, the northeast, and the east as the fleet makes its way south and southwest towards the equator. Transgressing the equator is one of the biggest challenges of this leg. There's an area called the doldrums, which you've probably heard about. I'll give you a little spiel on the doldrums in a minute. But the doldrums are an area of very low wind and also very fickle and volatile winds. So the doldrums are narrower and easier to transgress the more west you are over towards Brazil, and they're much longer and more difficult along the coast of Africa. Of course, since the fleet's trying to go from Southampton to Cape Town, skirting the edge of Africa is the shortest distance. But a lot of times in sailing, it pays to sail a longer course in more wind, and you easily overcome the extra mileage. Once the teams get out of the doldrum area and in the southern hemisphere, they'll be hooking into the trade winds of the St. Helena High, and those winds are also coming from the east, and they'll be on port jibe going down the south basically, or maybe slightly southwest initially along the coast of Brazil, and skirting the high pressure, which has no wind in it, will be to their east. And again, they'll be trying to cut it as close as they can because it's shorter distance, but without getting in the light air. And finally, the last weather regime they'll deal with is that the westerlies will kick up down about 30 degrees south latitude, and they will have southwesterlies and westerlies on starboard tack heading into Cape Town and the finish at Tabletop Mountain. Now I'd like to give you an overview of the entire route for the 2023 Ocean Globe race. The race will start here at point 1 in Southampton, England, and the first leg takes the fleet down across the equator to Cape Town, South Africa. From Cape Town, the fleet will sail in the Southern Ocean under Australia and arrive in Auckland, New Zealand. From Auckland, New Zealand, the fleet heads south again down into the Southern Ocean, comes up around famous Cape Horn into Punta del Este, Uruguay, and the final leg of the race is from Punta del Este, Uruguay, back to Southampton, England. It'll take the fleet about 160 sailing days, which I think with the stopovers means that they'll be competing in this race for about 8 months. I'm going to give you a really short course on the global wind patterns, which of course are extremely important if you're trying to sail a boat around the planet. Basically, in the high latitudes, that is to say north of 30 north and south of 30 south, you have westerly winds. Those are the prevailing winds. In the southern hemisphere, they're known as the roaring 40s, the furious 50s. You've heard about famous 100-foot waves at Cape Horn. That's a persistent weather pattern in the high latitudes. The low latitudes we consider between 30 north and 30 south across the equator. And in both hemispheres, we have trade winds. In the North Atlantic, the weather pattern is governed by something called the Azores High. And sometimes the Azores High elongates all the way over to Bermuda, and it's known as the Azores and Bermuda High. But high pressure in the North Hemisphere has clockwise circulation. And so, for example, that's very interesting to us when we're sailing from England down along the coast of Spain and Africa. We're going to get, trailing winds, winds from behind, which will be much more pleasant than sailing, for example, from England over to New York, in which case we would have to fight the headwinds. Once we get through the equator, we will again pick up some trade winds, which are spun off of the St. Helena High. The high pressure in the southern hemisphere rotates counterclockwise. All this has to do with the Coriolis effect, probably something you've heard of. And so we will meet southeasterly winds on the exit of the doldrums. And once again, we will sail down, in this case, the west side of that high pressure system, so that we have the favorable trailing winds. And we will hook into the westerlies at the very end of leg one to make our way into Cape Town and the finish at Tabletop Mountain. So that's a wrap on episode 1 of Team Translated at the Ocean Globe Race. We're going to do this every Friday for the next 8 months, so please join us as we follow Marco and the team on this wild adventure. You know, I think it's notable that Marco found in this Ocean Globe Race a metaphor for one of his deepest beliefs, which is believing in humans, and the fact that everything we do is created by humans to be used by humans. And I think it's going to be great to see how this plays out. Really, there's nothing more human than sailing around the world. The reliance on your teammates is super important. At any given time, every person on this boat will have the lives of their teammates in their hands. So it's a great demonstration of humanity and camaraderie and skill and perseverance, frankly. So let's remember, we all need to believe in humans.